Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. It's Herle here, guiding, choreographing, maybe even wheedling this assembly of nonpareil strategic thinkers. Our ever-loving political panel, Kory Teneycke, Jordan Leichnitz, and Scott Reid. Here's the rundown this week, team. We'll talk about Trudeau's hidden summer tour, a somnambulant Liberal Party, and a possible cabinet shuffle as part of a general Ottawa roundup. Our cursed clipping is a meaty one. It comes from the Wall Street Journal, a detailed breakdown of gender voting differences this election cycle and how the parties seem to be making it a zero-sum calculation. Then, shifting sentiment on immigration politics before the great Mr. Pinson, from a place far beyond the reach of these concerns, brings the show to a close with our Hey Yous. Scott, Jordan, Kory, I had a shit weekend. It rained all fucking weekend, and the Riders lost again. So I'm kind of bummed out. You guys?
Well, I can second that. I continue to struggle with the buying the computer, a new phone at the same time. I've been in the computer shop 200 times. Yesterday, I sat down in the middle of the floor and just started to cry in the middle of the computer shop. And then like not too hard at first, but and then, and then whatever. You could see people flipping through this HR manual, wondering how to intercept me, and do we touch him, right? People are like, sir, do you feel that you were in mental distress? You're fucking right, I'm in mental distress. So anyway, no, not so good. I can't handle computers. I'm no good. I'm like my mom now. I sound like my mom. I don't understand computers. I don't get computers.
You've been struggling with this problem for weeks.
Yes,
we're happy. It's been 4 weeks.
Yeah, great.
We're happy that you're at least on the trajectory of improving your technology and upgrading it. I had a good weekend. I was out in Vancouver. I made it back yesterday, but man, some good food there. Went to some Michelin-starred Chinese food place, which I won't even attempt to pronounce, as I'll butcher it so badly. But man, Peking duck, unbelievably good. Highly recommend.
Vancouver's such a great city.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Yep. Good.
Jordan, you're okay?
I don't like it.
I'm good. We're on countdown till school start. We start a week early here. And so I took my kids to the water park this weekend, which, let's be real, is as much for me as it is for them. So, Scott doesn't like the water park. What?
Oh my God, I hate
Vancouver
the water park.
or fucking anything.
Which one? Did you go to Calypso?
Yeah.
I'm Eeyore.
No, I didn't go to Calypso. I'm not made of money, Kory. Jesus. No.
I hate the water park. I loathe the water park. You have to walk around. First of all, you're barely you're mostly naked among strangers. The stench of chlorine is inescapable. It is loud. Children are screaming. They throw water at you. It's the most, I hate it. It's the most unpeaceful place to be a parent in the world.
I don't know. It's actually, I feel like my kids are getting to an age now where they have that little kiddie area. And if I play my cards right, they can go and do slides and I can sit for a minute.
I'm going to make the pitch on Calypso. You need to go there. There's a VIP seating area right where the river run kind of enters and exits, and they will bring you drinks to your cabana. And
all right, Kory, next time you're in town, we're going.
Margaritas and watch the kids as they float past. It's amazing. Okay,
this is good. We got a plan.
Right.
It's like fucking Downton Abbey, wherever Kory is.
So it's a whole other side of life. I'm here for it.
All right. Let's start with a little roundup of recent federal political developments. Scott, Trudeau is out on a seemingly campaign-type tour. And he's doing it in a deliberate way so as not to have national media coverage of this tour, just local media coverage of this tour, it appears. Pops up in various places at various events around the country, doing campaign-style events. They seem to be going well, by the way, and the local media coverage seems to be pretty positive about them. Is this a new tactic, and is this a smart tactic?
I think it's a tried and true tactic in terms of. Sorry, somebody's trying to call me there. It's a tried and true tactic in terms of trying to get better media coverage. I remember doing similar things with Harper in the dark recesses of his popularity towards the end. We did a lot more stuff internationally as a way to try to do something similar. But look, I thought they moved some pretty good photos. The mini donuts thing at the X, I thought was pretty good. There's sort of a bit of a Where's Waldo element to the thing. Where's the prime minister going to pop up? Find him in this photograph. But yeah, look, I think it's a tried and true, sensible tactic. I'm not sure it really changes anything. If one wanted to be, dickish about this, it's if you don't advertise your events, then protesters can't show up and boo you off stage or out of the venue. So there's maybe a bit of advantage in doing that too, just in terms of trying to control those visuals as well.
There seems to be a contrast between what we understand his popularity to be in the polls and what the reaction at these events to him seems to be like. And is that just celebrity status? Are people just excited to see Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, or are they actually enthusiastic about him as a candidate? Scott, what do you think?
I think they are genuinely enthusiastic to see him as prime minister. Justin Trudeau, famous prime minister's visiting. I go, oh my God, that's the prime minister over there. I get to stand next to the prime minister. And look, I think it is a deliberate strategy. I think it is a deliberate strategy, not in the sense that they sat down at the whiteboard and said, what can we do that works best? But this is more like, this is the best we got strategy. I mean, they, as we've talked endlessly, they have chosen not to play cards this summer, right? They haven't done any dramatic change to the team. They haven't done any dramatic change to policy. Obviously, the prime minister's not leaving. And so in the absence of substantive change, I think that they've come to the conclusion that the best they can do is put him in places where people are happy to see him, and therefore we see people happy to see him, and we had the exact reaction you're having, David, and then I've had. These pictures are positive. These people seem to be genuinely thrilled to meet him and see him, and he looks full of energy and enthusiasm. And so I think for within the context of what it is, it's pretty good. It doesn't change anything, in my view. It's not going to alter the trajectory of their electoral fortunes. It's not going to reverse people's impressions overall. But if you're looking
there's
for
no
something,
message to it, right, Scott? It's
no
just
message
popular
whatsoever.
events. There's no message
That's right.
that you're hearing.
But in that sense, I think maybe part of it is just kind of a little bit of a F you, not everyone hates us, okay? So just chill out, all right? You go to this place and you go to that place and you go to the Coe Hill Fair and people are fucking happy to see the prime minister. So knock it off, pundit dickface. And so that's, I think part of it. But I don't think it fundamentally alters anything, but I do think in a context where they're not playing cards and then it's kind of like Apollo 13, they walk into the PMO and they say, here's a box of parts. This is everything we have on the prime minister's tour. Make something that isn't terrible that, and so they go, well, we can't get him back to Earth, but at least, we'll try to put him in a place where people appear to be enthusiastic to see him. And I honestly think there's no more or less to it than that. It's just put up nice pictures and then we'll deal with the troubles down the road come fall or not deal with it.
Jordan, the problem with it is that when you watch him in these events, you're reminded of how good he is at actually campaigning.
Yeah.
Right. And so you look at him out there meeting those people, interacting with those people with the grin on his smile on his face and the physicality of the guy and all that kind of looking like $1 million. Mm-hmm. And you want to think he's still the 2015 guy because he looks like the 2015 guy. But it just doesn't work the same anymore.
It's sort of all good until he opens his mouth to talk to the national, press in any way, right? Because I agree with what everybody has said so far. This is absolutely about generating those images that, that exude some sense of popularity and connection with regular people. But I think it's also likely about managing his own feelings and his own, making sure that he has some positive experiences this summer. He's about to head into, I imagine, a difficult cabinet retreat and a brutal caucus retreat. And so having a summer full of people lining up to take selfies with him, it's also not bad for giving him a bit of headspace around this. And so I would imagine that the approach is almost as much about that as it
What
is
makes
about,
you? I know we were talking off camera about how important it is to interrupt you constantly. So let me go first.
by all means, Scott. I hardly know what to do with uninterrupted talking time.
I'm curious. So you just said something. I'd like to know. I'd like you to elaborate. Why do you think it's going to be a particularly brutal cabinet and caucus retreat? Does that imply you think people are going to be standing up and giving them the Jesus?
I think that certainly if they have any sense, what cabinet and caucus should be pressing on as they go into the fall is the fact that there has been no change. There's been zero change since St. Paul's in this PMO's strategy, in this prime minister's approach. It's like a meteor hit them and they've just kept calm and carried on. And I think that at this point, it's fairly evident that the wisdom coming from the PMO that if we just continue to talk about the policy offers in a positive way and we continue to do what we're doing, that people will come back to us has been disproven by the facts and reality. And that there will likely and should, if people have a good survival instinct, be significant pressure for a change in approach. One that's obviously not supported by the current team around Trudeau. So I think that is difficult. That makes for conflict, for sure. That's clearly not what he and those around him are interested in doing at the moment.
So listen, the three of you, I open this up to the floor. The media keep talking about a cabinet shuffle. I hear no indications about a shuffle of any significance. I don't know if they're going to move one or two people around for various reasons. People might not be running again. Maybe they make some move on Pablo. But I hear nothing that indicates they're going to reshape the government in a shuffle. You? Anybody else?
Yeah,
Not in any way that's meaningful, I don't think, right? The thing that I do think is going on, though, behind the scenes of or as a environment that this discussion's happening in, is what's happening in what's happening.
Sorry, kid explosion. Pardon me. Back to regularly scheduled, boring.
That's great. Those are always priceless. Look, what's happening in the U.S., I think, is the context in which a lot of these other things are happening this summer. You've seen a candidate replacement 3 months out from an election campaign, and the polls turning from Biden looking like certain defeat to now, if election were held tomorrow, a Kamala Harris victory in all likelihood. So, that sort of reversal has got to have people asking the question, is the problem that we have here is the thing that we need to change, not cabinet, but who's sitting in the captain's chair.
Well, and the interesting thing, Kory, is that the change from Biden to Harris has not just put Harris in the lead, it's changed the election. The election's not about Biden or Harris. The election is now about Trump. It's a referendum on Trump-Vance, right? And so that's sort of what the Liberals are hoping is, when is anybody going to take a look at Poilievre? Well, in the States, they weren't looking at Trump until they got rid of Biden.
And we've talked before, I don't think it's a direct comparison, just because they changed doesn't mean, but I do think that it's difficult not to look on the energy and enthusiasm of the Harris campaign with a huge amount of envy when you compare it to the energy, the just sort of laying down on the tracks doom that's really what seems to be the prevailing vibe up here.
And the other thing that's relevant is that up until she got this job, nobody thought Kamala Harris would generate this reaction.
Exactly. Right? This is the other element of it. This idea that there has to be somebody who is as widely viewed as more popular and just not the case. You could make the argument that Harris was the least attractive of the potential people to lead that ticket. Compared to Whitmer, compared to Newsom, there's a lot of other choices there that would seem more obvious if you're going to replace Biden and wanted a more charismatic option to lead the ticket. Harris is doing it, and it makes you beg the question: is a Jolie or someone like that who is not well known, would they have a similar ability? I don't know. But if you're not thinking that, in Liberal caucus or Liberal cabinet or in Liberal, activist world, then I question, how much you're paying attention.
Welcome to week 8 of our Summer of Fascinating and Very Useful Tech series. Has it been the summer lounging listen you were hoping for? Did our little quantum computing primer from a couple of weeks back mix well with your gin and tonic? Hope so. On behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS, we press on. This week we're talking ORAN, short for Open Radio Access Network. Now that's an acronym I can get my head around, Hurly-Burlyites. Lots of reasons why. ORAN is a new approach to building and managing wireless networks using open standards, open hardware, and software. Open means just what it sounds like. It allows different parts of the network to come from various companies and still work together seamlessly. Right now, there are only 3 vendors who control 77% of the global market share of traditional closed radio access networks. Just 2 vendors have 75% share in North America. Open RAN is poised to disrupt that hegemony and diversify the ecosystem, driving innovation and unlocking new possibilities. Expectations are by 2028, ORAN will account for 25% of worldwide RAN revenues. And if Canada captures 10% of the global ORAN market by 2030, it could generate approximately $3 billion annually. Underneath those raw numbers, meaningful human impact. ORAN will create jobs, foster entrepreneurship, attract more investment to the telecom sector, and ultimately build better, more resilient networks. It works like this. When different equipment from various vendors works together, it makes a network more flexible and adaptable. That leads directly to better connectivity, and better connectivity leads to all kinds of good stuff. Access to healthcare and education, the ability to do more business, safer, more vibrant communities. The list goes on, and so will we next week.
Can I go back to cabinet shuffle for a second? Because I think it's like within the pocket universe of government / Ottawa / liberal world right now, it's kind of a big headache because I assume that they have to do some shuffle, some modification to cabinet, right? You've got like I assume it certainly looks as though Pablo's leaving, so you have to make an adjustment there. That's Quebec. Do you make any other adjustments? Are there other tweaks? I mean, you might want to promote somebody else into the whatever Minister of Middle Class, fucking prosperity and handsome or whatever. But I think last summer was literally such a train crash of a cabinet shuffle that has had a scarring psychological effect. And now, so they can't, there's no way to describe a shuffle of any kind as mattering if it doesn't literally move Carney in or Freeland out or something of that nature. It's almost that litmus test. And I'm assuming that that's not going to happen. They don't want to have it happen. So now they have this weird thing about how do they manage if they need to make just some, tinkering. How do they do it? How do they characterize it? How do they message it? I mean, I would be very tempted, media, even behind the scenes from a preparation and tech standpoint are saying, okay, well, look for something maybe at the beginning of this week. I don't know. There's no visible indication that there will be, but you think objectively you could see them making some tweaks. But if I were them, I would do it on like Friday at 4:00 and just go, you know what? 2 hours ago, a couple of people showed up at Rideau Hall. We made some changes. You don't care. We don't care. They and their families care. That's fucking it. Back to summer. And because I almost think there's no narrative that you can come up with. And I'd be very, very, they broke cabinet shuffles last summer. They fucking broke cabinet shuffles. And so now I'd be very worried
they hit the
about
button
showing
and
up
then
with any narrative.
It up. That's the thing. They had a shot at that as their reset, and then they chose to not actually make any substantive change to their approach and strategy.
Yeah, but come on. Cabinet shuffle, schmebinet shuffle. This government is run from the Prime Minister's office. All of the ideas come from the Prime Minister's office. The political direction is set from the Prime Minister's office. You could change everybody. In fact, you could probably change Freeland and nothing would really change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cabinet doesn't.
I think that's why they broke the cabinet shuffles last year, is that is what came into crystal clear, undeniable focus last year. big, huge reset cabinet shuffle. And you're like, actually, none of that matters. You could push all of them into the Atlantic Ocean and it wouldn't make a difference. By the way, I think there's a risk for them in watching the DNC. I really think there is a liberal bias, hope, desperation, thinking we're just going to drift until November now because we've seen that. Depending on how you want to look at the magic 8 ball, you can say, well, if Trudeau stays, then that shows that she can bring, like our agenda is on the right track and it's the winning formula. If you look at what she's peddling and how she's peddling it and the positivity, well, that's what we are. And that's what Trudeau's going to remind people of. And therefore we can do that. And you're like, or if the magic 8 ball rolls up the other way and you're like, we're going to replace it. Well, then see, that's it. Once you replace, you can reset the whole race and people will now look around the corner and scrutinize Poilievre. And so I think you hear this kind of thinking coming from Liberals and it's just, none of that is strategy. I mean, it's barely prayer.
Well, I think the one there's some potential in and the other there isn't. But whether they choose to change leaders or not, that is something that allows you to reframe and have the focus turn to the other candidate to a greater extent. Everyone has super well established thoughts about the prime minister. And increasingly thoughts about who Poilievre is, and one is positive and the other is negative. It's bad news for the prime minister. They need to fundamentally change that dynamic if they want to have any hope. And as we've said before about cabinets, you'd have to know who these people are in the general population and in the influenceable, sort of marginal voters that we're all seeking to win over. You'd have to know who these people are to have it matter that they change positions in the cabinet. And frankly, past Freeland, none of them are really known.
Just as a tiny sign of fracturing, I think I saw this morning that Minister Dan Vandel from Manitoba kicked the shit out of the appointment of Charles Adler to the Senate.
Yes.
Yeah. Said there's quite a number of more qualified Manitobans to represent the province in the Senate than Adler. It's interesting that a minister would say that about a prime ministerial appointment. Hey, there's something that's been lurking around for a couple of weeks, and I just want to do a little drive-by on this, and that is the bots that emerged on social media after Poilievre's event in Kirkland Lake, Ontario. And I guess from what I've read about this, nobody seriously is suggesting that the Conservatives are behind this, in part because it was so amateurishly done and so badly done. Nonetheless, it happened. CBC has a report about some academics who did an analysis of this, and they concluded that it was probably a rogue amateur doing it by him or herself. To what end, a person doesn't know. But there are indications that China's done this in the past. Why would people be doing this, and what effect might it have, Jordan?
Yeah, well, so why an individual would do it, I think this case in particular is a bit of a weird one because, as you said, it was so obvious. People visibly caught it because it was so amateurly done, or it was so basic, And I think one of the things that certainly struck me, and I think some of the experts talk about this, with the access that people now have to generative AI, there's really no excuse for sort of a bot farm to just be recopying the same message. So what that leads me to think is that, this is probably happening more than we are noticing, right? This one was easy to catch. This was easy for people to see because it was just a carbon copy of the same message. But there's obviously likely efforts to kind of astroturf social media out there that are less easily detectable. And I think that one of the things, that is pretty obvious in our context, in our conversation around foreign interference, is that this is a tool that's available to third parties and to foreign states who have an interest, not just in interfering in the elections necessarily for or against a certain party, but also just undermining the idea of the truth and information that's out there, right? This is just, I think, also something that's a disruptive move to just make people doubt what they're seeing out there on the internet. And I think, especially for a certain class of people who are kind of terminally online and terminally on Twitter and It's a really important reminder that what folks are seeing out there is not always going to be something with real humans behind it. And I think that our system, as actually was evidenced in this case, because you had a lot of the experts coming out and saying, like, there's really no way to trace this. Like, we don't really know, like, we can't really tell where this is coming from. It's going to be really hard to pin down who is behind these things. But we know that they're out there, and I think it's a real conundrum as we head into an election with foreign interference kind of in the back of everybody's head. Like, what do you do to sort of shore up the trust in the information ecosystem that people have? Like, where are people getting their information about what's happening? And then you have, CBC doing its bonus thing. Meanwhile, so like, it's not great, right? The whole setup, I think, is really troubling right now.
Kory, what is smiling there, smirking there like you got something to say?
Well, I just think it's a bullshit topic, with all due respect, David. Like, this is being true of Twitter and social media for many electoral cycles now. And I think Jordan put her finger on where most of it comes from. It's generally foreign interference. And it's done with the purpose of trying to, undermine elections and confidence in our democratic system generally. But who are the major perpetrators? It's Iran, it's Russia, it's China. And like, there's no upside for any candidate or any campaign to be doing, comical tweet farm, bullshit messages about people attending events they never attended. Like, there's no upside.
No, I agree.
So, but there's also nothing new, right? And if you're looking for good information on what's going on in the world, newsflash to everybody, I wouldn't start with social media. Like, this is not with the center of where truth comes from.
But young
in
people
the world
do
today.
Most people do.
Yes.
Most people under the age of 45 do.
But look, I would be more concerned about the less transparent, problematic things like the TikTok algorithm, which pushes anti-Israel, pro-Hamas sort of messaging at 10 times the rate that it does the other side of the argument, in a way that is not transparent at all. So, you've got all kinds of things that you could look at in that social media environment. But what's the common underlying theme on these sort of mass versions of false information being reproduced and pushed out? It's generally foreign actors, and in this case, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Who knows? Also, I just don't see it as being anything different than what we've seen on social media for like more than a decade. So who cares?
Right. Folks, Canada has been slow walking all summer toward a shutdown of rail service. And it's almost here, like right now, this week. Both our sponsor, CN, and its main competitor, CPKC, have been at the bargaining table since last November. Talks have gone nowhere. And a severe gut punch to the economy is about to happen. Let's talk about what a full shutdown of rail service will mean to this country. CN directly supports about 100,000 jobs in Canada, not just its own railroaders, but all the employees of all the companies that supply the railway. That's a big number. Now add on the workforces of industries that rely on rail, employees at ports, on assembly lines, farmers, forestry, mining and factory workers. The list goes on. Just about everything travels by rail. You get the idea. If there is a shutdown, incoming containers at seaports will stack up. Grain won't be loaded onto outgoing ships. Auto plants will start shutting down. Consumer goods, perishables, critical medical equipment, manufactured products, they all move by train. How will this affect Canadians? Well, think back to COVID, the shortages, the empty spaces on shelves, the inflation. The fact is, CN has a record of labor peace. Since January, the company has made 4 offers. They're all posted on CN's website. The union has rejected all 4 without any counteroffer. That's a fact. CN believes the best agreement is a negotiated agreement. But you cannot negotiate when the other side doesn't show up at the table. That's a reality. Admitting facts and realities is not anti-union. But time is running out. Already, both railways have stopped accepting certain shipments that for safety reasons cannot be left stranded in the event of a shutdown. And we haven't even talked here about the impact on Canadians who commute by rail. In any case, CN believes it is now time for the federal government to intervene. The alternative, which will happen at 1 minute after midnight on August 22nd, is simply in no Canadian's interest. Scott, whoever did it, were they trying to embarrass the Conservatives by making it look like it was a Conservative thing, but making it obvious and terrible?
It was clearly a false flag operation. I think it was a group of NDP and Liberal activists who got together and attempted to bring derision down upon. I don't know. I don't know the answer, obviously.
Well, none of us know.
I think a couple things, and I don't have particularly deep thoughts about it. One is that I think it reminds us, and we've all said this, it reminds us that social media isn't what it was 10 years ago, which is a vehicle for profound political communication and tactics. It feels like it's really breaking. And it was, though. You could reach voters. And look at what Poilievre's done. Look at how he's built
Twitter is
up.
being a open sewer crossed with an insane asylum since its very inception.
But you could harness a community on it. And
I could, look, what kind of community?
Pierre Poilievre built up.
At its peak, Twitter was less than 10% of actual active verifiable users. So it's never been huge, and it's always been the worst place to find good information. And it's only becoming
that doesn't mean that it hasn't gotten worse. Let me finish my point, Kory.
Right? It's a bit broader.
Well,
let me finish my fucking point. Okay?
All
my
right.
point is this. My point is, yeah, sure, you can say it's always been a sewer, and I'm hardly going to disagree, but it's a deeper, darker, smellier sewer now. And so that's all I'm saying, is that to the degree to which you were ever able to use social media tools to harness people, engage and activate people, those days are over. Now it is just a mess. Second, I don't know if it's an individual or a foreign interest. If it's a foreign interest, then, as Jordan says, probably going to be a sign of things to come. If it's an individual, well, then there's also a troubling issue about accountability, which is how do you hold campaigns accountable if they have supporters who do shit like this? And the answer is you can't and you won't. So we're just going to live with this shit.
But that seems predicated on the assumption that it's the Conservatives that would have done that. They're
I just said if. If it's a foreign interference, right. if it's some individual, on the other hand, who thinks that they're actually being helpful but they're a tool and they are clumsy.
Look, but the point is that we don't know who it was, and we apparently don't have the capacity to know, which actually seems like a much bigger problem.
And also, who cares, right? Yeah. So, look, where is...
I think it matters.
I don't think about who cares.
Yeah. Well,
we can't just resign ourselves.
Okay, well, this is worrying about things you have no ability to actually influence. Governments aren't particularly good at getting, child porn off the internet, let alone figuring out what parental basement dweller or foreign power, put out a bunch of tweets.
Well, how about we hold the cretins in charge of these platforms to account? Why is it that they're just borderless giants who are able to trample across sovereign governments and ignore regulatory and policy-making apparatus anywhere and everywhere they wish? Fuck that noise.
We're veering far into the realm of policy and out of politics. What do I think is actually interesting for people on campaigns right now around these platforms is that I think a lot of the best stuff that you can do in terms of digital marketing and the like is moving off of social media. There are audiences that you can reach through these things, but the platforms themselves, with X probably being an exception in the other direction, but the Instagrams and Facebooks of the world, these algorithms are being tweaked to actually downplay political content. There is only downside in terms of having your platform become all about that. And I think a lot of this is moving into private chat groups. And this is one of the things that I think is interesting, that if you're looking south of the border right now in terms of digital strategies, trying to get into people's WhatsApp groups and things like that to be a part of those conversations where a lot of this is gravitating towards, which is, I think from a campaign perspective, more where the ball is going.
I just, if I was a campaign manager, I would be nervous about people out there doing things that could impact on the reputation of my campaign without me having any control over it. All right, here's our clipping. You guys got your deep thinking hats on, because this is a serious subject matter here. Our clipping comes from the pen of Richard Reeves, writing in the Wall Street Journal about gender differences in voting. Men have broadly preferred Republican presidential candidates for decades, so it makes some sense for Republicans to be honing this appeal. The problem is that the party is now promoting a hyper-masculine ideal that alienates female voters. Comments such as J.D. Vance's about childless cat ladies have put the campaign on the defensive for the way they seem to denigrate women. The Democrats, by contrast, have handily consolidated their natural advantage among women. Even before Kamala Harris rose to the top of the ticket, female voters were galvanized by an election that promises to dictate the future of their reproductive rights. Harris now earns reliable cheers from women at rallies when she declares, "We aren't going back." The problem for Democrats is that their embrace of women's issues often ignores the challenges facing men. Under the heading Who We Serve, the Democratic Party platform lists various demographic groups, including women, the LGBTQ plus community, African Americans, and so on. Guess which group doesn't make the list? Men. If many men feel that their concerns aren't being taken seriously by Democrats, well, they're not wrong. It's therefore no surprise to see a big gender gap in voting intentions. Among likely female voters, Harris leads Trump by 14 points, 55 to 41, while Trump leads by 17 points among men, 56 to 39. The gender gap among younger voters is especially stark, with women under 30 moving left while their male peers move right. Where do the parties go from here? Perhaps each side will double down. Democrats may try to pick up extra votes from women to offset their losses among men, while Republicans do the same in the other direction. That would turn the election in November into a rather grim choice between a women's party and a men's party. A better way forward would be for the campaigns to break out of this zero-sum calculation on gender. This means crafting a political message that acknowledges that both men and women are facing real and distinct challenges right now, without suggesting the fault lies with the needs and desires of the opposite sex. For Republicans, this would mean disavowing some of the more misogynistic claims of the manosphere, including the most pernicious, that the advances of women have come at the expense of men. For Democrats, the first step is to simply acknowledge the reality of the problems facing American men. The facts here are stark. Boys and men are lagging at every stage of the education system, with massive gaps opening up on college campuses. Wages for working class men have stagnated, along with their marital prospects. White men raised poor are much worse off if they were born in 1992 than in 1978. The male suicide rate is 4 times higher than for women and claims 40,000 men a year. The suicide rate among men under age 30 has risen by 40% since 2010. The point isn't that male struggles aren't confected. The point is that male struggles aren't confected by reactionaries. They are real, and they are not being adequately addressed by either side. Kory, what's your take on this, particularly in the Canadian context?
Well, look, there is a gender disparity in U.S. politics, and this is speaking to that. There really isn't in Canadian politics, and now there's some similar problems in terms of bad outcomes with men right now, be it the metric of addiction or suicide or college enrollment and on and on. A lot of the same problems exist, but you don't see a gender disparity in the same way. Like, if you look at the latest Abacus numbers, the Conservatives are leading the Liberals by a greater margin with women than they are with men. Like, they're 21 points over with women, and they're only 18 points over the Liberals with men. So like you just don't see it in Canadian politics. And, even on the provincial side, the ratios are about the same. Like, Ford's leading the Liberals by 13 points with women right now. Is leading by more than that, like by 23 with men. But, winning with men more provincially, but winning with women more federally right now in terms of what that gap is. So I don't think it's applicable in terms of what we're seeing in the polling here, but I think in the U.S. context, it's a very interesting point, and I think the way that you're seeing Trump campaigning, this sort of hypermasculinity, the way they choreographed their national convention was very, very uber male sort of vibe coming off the thing from Hulk Hogan
and I'm sorry, but if Hulk Hogan is not doing drag, I don't know what is happening in the world, because that was
maybe he is. I don't know. Apparently, J.D. Vance has done a bit of that. So it's I think it's a different situation. I do think it would be wise for the Democrats to try to address some of these problems and take them seriously with men. I think it would help them. Look, I think for the Republicans, I think the cat lady stuff from Vance and that sort of narrative has been very detrimental to their prospects of winning over younger women.
So, Jordan, Kory is right. Okay, Poilievre's as strong among women as he is among men, and very strong among women, 42% of the vote, right? But that didn't used to be the case. There was historically a gender gap in Canadian politics. When I was running national Liberal campaigns, there was a serious gender gap, right? We did much better against Harper among women than we did against Harper among men. And I'm wondering what's happened to that gender gap. And I'm wondering why Canadian women are not reacting the same way to conservative politics as American women are.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, that gender gap existed very recently, like 2 years ago, that gender gap existed. So actually the Conservatives closing that is a very new phenomenon. We don't know if it's an enduring phenomenon. But I do agree with Kory that right now the dynamics that we're seeing are not necessarily comparable to what we're seeing in the United States. But I think, and in the article, there's, I think the key thing there is that where you're seeing that divide, it's when you see politics that are predicated on the idea that the advances of women are coming at the expense of men. This is a very, that type of kind of grievance around gender is very mobilizing for certain groups, particularly of young men, and that's pulling them more towards the J.D. Vance, the Republican side. Look, I think the issue here in Canada is different, but I do see that we still have maybe some shadows of this in our politics, and you can see it obviously on the side of the Liberals, Trudeau and the first feminist prime minister, the gender balanced cabinet, all of these things, and that to me really echoes a lot of what we saw kind of in Hillary Clinton's last campaign too. The I'm with her really forefronting a lot of that representational politics around gender. So the idea that if you have women in these roles, that sort of in and of itself is a significant advancement. And I think, look, there's
add
no
women
doubt
change politics, I think
that's
was
right.
the phrase.
And there's no doubt that it is essential to add women. You do add women. Women are half the population. They have amazing reservoirs of capacity and talent, and they should have absolutely equal footing. But it's also not sufficient, right? And I think that where that falls down is that it doesn't actually, it doesn't sort of address material things for either gender, right? And I think that, one of the things that I find really interesting is that in the Harris campaign, her gender is a non-issue, right? They are doing almost the opposite of what the Clinton campaign did in terms of not speaking about the potential historic nature of her candidacy, not speaking about, sort of women run the world, that type of thing that we would have seen, maybe 10 years ago. And I think that the reason for that is because it does unnecessarily turn off potential voters who are men. And I think that the risk of that type of politicking on the progressive side is significant because there are real grievances that men and boys have. There are real problems. We can see it in Canada. We see it in the United States. And if there's not a space for discussing those in mainstream politics, then these folks are going to find that space in the Jordan Peterson online manosphere, a space that is way more toxic and I think way more corrosive societally, and frankly, just out and out misogynistic. Now, where this all loops back to the Conservatives and Poilievre, I think that there's a couple things that I would observe about his campaign and its relationship with gender. And the first is that you really didn't see a shift in female voter perceptions of Poilievre until they dumped millions of dollars into advertising where he didn't say a single fucking word, where his wife talked about the softer image of him. And I think that that's very important to note because it really also highlights that when you look at some of his own instincts on how to talk about these issues, where Poilievre wants to go when he's kind of left to his own devices, like they're not so great. Like he wants to be out there tweeting about Jordan Peterson. He's out there in speeches making comments about, people bringing their dates back to their basements.
But nobody in Canada knows who Jordan Peterson is, so it doesn't hurt him.
I think that that's less true. And there's certainly like an ick factor there for women who, and I assure you, a lot of women know who Jordan Peterson is. Like anybody who's carrying the 12 Rules book, you just like avoid them at the bar, right? But I think that it just like there's some instincts there within Poilievre and his camp that could hurt them on this file. And I think also back, I was in the chamber when President Biden came to speak in 2022, and there was a super weird moment where he talked about Trudeau's gender balanced cabinet, and the entire Conservative bench sat on their hands and didn't applaud. Now, did most people notice that? No, but it's a weird instinct, right? Like, so when the Conservatives want to kind of indulge in this sort of anti-woke, stuff, I think that there's a big risk that they overreach and they polarize on gender in a way that's harmful to the gains that they've made towards women. And so that's why I will be curious to see how and if this lead among women endures. It is true that they have made some huge gains there, but that support is also really soft. And so we'll see, we'll see if he's able to keep it together.
You're going back a long ways to find the gender gap with Conservatives. Like what's more true is if you're leading in the polls, you're probably leading with both genders in Canada. That is more true than not.
But that wasn't true less than 2 years ago, Kory.
Yeah, well, it depends which female demographic you're looking at. But, if we're just taking women overall, but Conservatives have been leading on, women over 55 for a long time and like a long time. I would have to go back and check the data, but I would say even, Harper in 2015 would have had an advantage with that demo of women. What's interesting is that Poilievre is doing well with younger women too. He's doing well with women across the board. And so, this is, I think it's something that people on the progressive side would like to be true. It's just not true in terms of what we're seeing in Canadian data. As for, kind of the manosphere stuff, like, look, I don't, subscribe to everything that Jordan Peterson says, but I don't think he's a boogeyman. Like, I'm not sure why, you talk about him a bunch if you're Pierre Poilievre. But there's a big space between like an Andrew Tate and a Jordan Peterson. Like one is, pretty toxic. And the other one is, basically a self-help guru who, if you actually look at what he says, isn't that different?
No, he's a full-on.
He's pretty objectionable.
I don't want to talk about Jordan Peterson.
Pig.
I don't want to talk about Jordan Peterson. Scott, I want to hear you say, I can see how the Liberals can get back some votes from women. I can see the issue set. I can see the appeal. But it feels like we've completely stopped competing for male votes. I mean, it's just been brutal for a number of years now, and I don't see anything. I mean, the government is so determined to be a feminist government that it seems unable to reach out and speak to men in this country right now.
I do worry about that. I don't quite know how to fix it. I don't quite know that it can't be fixed unless there's a shift in leadership, because I think you're in this perverse place now, I think, because the agenda has been so stapled to the vest that substantive, genuine, and important lasting policy initiatives that are positive, not just for women, but for Canadian society overall, for sure, now sometimes get dismissed as tokenism or performative. And, that's kind of that bad space that they're in now, right? And I don't know exactly how it got there. I don't, pretend to be a sociology professor. But I would say that I disagree with Kory when you go, well, look, there's no gender gap now, and you have to go back to ancient Greece in order to find one in Canada. I don't think that's true. I think we have to be careful. We're in a circumstance here where Poilievre is rolling, and it's a change election, and there's a bunch of factors contributing to the government's negatives. And so that puts you in a whip position if you're Poilievre. I think Jordan's right that they have to be a little careful about his instincts, the way that he chooses, and the manner in which he chooses to project strength can sometimes borderline on being pretty gender exclusive. But I don't think that's going to count. I don't think that's going to harm him. I think that Reeves' piece, and as a father of 4 boys, I do think about this shit quite a bit, to be honest with you. And we had a guest appearance from my youngest one. I think that Reeves' piece is over-analysis from the political perspective. I think that this guy has been writing and thinking about these issues and men and boys for years now. I think it's more of a policy analysis than it is a political analysis. I think the truth of the matter is that the Trump campaign is flailing, that he projects by instinct and impulse and by defensive posture. Now that he feels that he's losing and he's not penetrating, he defends an openly, abrasively misogynistic cadence all the time. And that's who that fucking guy is. And that ain't going to change. And as long as he's 6 points behind or 4 points behind or behind in 5 of the 6 swing states, that's going to get worse because that's him. I don't know that we can apply that to Canadian politics. I think it would be a mistake to do so. And so I don't have a lot more to offer than that, to be honest with you.
Okay, so I'm left with this thought, which is this is undeniably a problem. Anybody that knows people who are raising boys knows that there are a lot of boys in our society that are struggling right now, trying to find their way, trying to find their place, trying to understand their role. Yet I hear no expression of this in politics. I hear no conversation about this in politics. Is it impolitic to discuss the problems that men are having?
I do think that it is not reflexive for progressives to necessarily talk about men as a discrete group and to allocate resources to problems that are seen as male problems. I think that that's something that there's maybe discomfort with because there's a sense of obligation to offer that instead to groups that have been historically marginalized. Now, I think that there's a very compelling case to be made that you need to make sure that you are advancing women's rights and at the same time offering both compassion and solutions for the problems men have. Because, of course, women and men live in the same society and the conditions that men experience also impact the conditions that women live in. But look, I think we have to be careful not to overstate it. There are models of pro-feminist men's movement, right? We see that in Canada. We have like the White Ribbon campaign. There's a lot of different alternative masculinities out there. And I think that actually Tim Walz is an excellent example of this. Maybe we're not having the discussion in sort of academic terms about men and gender in the US election, but I think we're having it in terms of examples. And you can hold up the 2 VP picks as really interesting contrast points. And so you have somebody there he's a coach. He's somebody with a military background. He's got big Ted Lasso energy. And that is also a model of masculinity that has purpose around public service and community contribution that I think is something that's really important. And a lot of these discussions that you'll see talk about the need for boys and men to have an idea, a sense of identity and purpose within broader society. And so I think that we're seeing some competing visions of that are compelling and for sure in particular in the US race are going to take center stage in what that discussion is. But I also want to underline, and I think this applies a little bit more in the US right now, but there are also like very real policy stakes for women in these debates. The election of Trump led to sort of not just bad misogynistic rhetoric, but it also led to the repeal of Roe v. Wade, which is making women's lives absolutely more dangerous in a very real way. And, and I think I was reflecting on this a bit last night, and it reminded me a little bit of the Margaret Atwood quote, men are afraid that women are going to laugh at them and women are afraid that men are going to kill them. So this discussion, I think, about what happens when particularly when Republicans and the right really weaponize gender, I think you can't really have it without also talking about what the material policy consequences of that are for women, and that we're seeing play out now. And that is also a really important factor in what's polarizing the gender divide in the vote in the US.
Can I pull this back to some stuff that we talked about last week vis-a-vis the NDP? Because I think that the entire conversation being centered around gender and identity is exactly why they're getting their clock cleaned by traditional NDP support groups like, private sector union members, et cetera. There is a way to deal with issues that are affecting men that are not about just boiling everything down to identity politics. It's about dealing with some of the actual, other issues that are I think, far more front and center to what some of the problems and outcomes are. Like loss of identity, it is as much about the devaluing of some traditional forms of male labor. And this is one of the reasons why people are not going into the skilled trades in the way that they did, a couple generations ago. So there are things that you can do to address some of these bad policy outcomes, and also reach out and speak to those men who are feeling left out or alienated, but without reducing it to a university gender studies course narrative, which I think is highly off-putting to most men.
Yeah, I don't really see anybody doing that on the federal scene in Canada.
Well, Scott, you got the last word on this?
I do.
Scott?
I don't have a ton to add. I mean, I think obviously that another dimension that's really pronounced in American politics that distinguishes it, I think two other factors is that the highs and lows of American society, socioeconomic, are more pronounced, and so the relative level of threat, particularly economic and privilege threat, that a bunch of men feel in the United States might be more pronounced than here in Canada. I can't statistically support that, but that's my impression. And the second thing is abortion, right? I mean, you've got one part of the United States that's embraced in the most strident of ways, denying women control over choice. And that has, I think, really intensified the way gender infiltrates politics. And obviously, since Roe v. Wade was struck down, it hangs over this campaign heavily. And so those are distinct factors. I don't want to distinguish this entirely from the U.S. The last thing I would just say, just picking up on something Kory said earlier, I'll just say this, it's got nothing to do with politics. But when you talk about how political parties, how they talk about male issues and who's having this discussion, whatever, I'll just speak personally. Again, as the father of 4 boys, I have an interest in this subject. I need to have, as a responsible parent, an interest in this subject. I don't like anybody I talk with or hear talking about this subject, because when you go into the manosphere, it is almost entirely fueled by rage and a sense of threat and weirdness. And so even if I feel like there's a discussion I'd be keen to tap into, I've not been exposed to it in ways that feel healthy, so I avoid it.
But we're not talking about an extreme group of people here. If you look at men under the age of 65 in Canada, Poilievre's at 50 points or more. Like in a 4-party race.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a pretty clear consensus among men that there's one party that they feel represents them.
Well, I think the question for liberals is how to feel less alienating to men as compared to, say, sitting around, in a circle in a church basement, as though this is a kind of an MA instead of an AA, Males Anonymous meeting, where we'd be sitting there saying, how do we connect with men and what do we do to support men? Like, I think it's more about, well, how do you chisel that down? What are we doing that feels alienating to men?
And it's hard,
but
I
I'm
think,
not
to
pretending I have
divorce
any
that
answers
from people's feelings about Trudeau, personally.
Well, I guess we're seeing, because those young men are not going NDP, they're going conservative, right?
Yeah.
Nor are the young women, though. Let's just bring it back to the reality here. The Liberals and the NDP are doing worse with women in terms of the point spread between Poilievre and the other two parties than they are with men. So,
that's not true for the NDP.
Well, okay. So there's like a 21-point gap between the conservatives and the liberals with women. It's only 20 points different with the NDP. Poilievre is doing 20 points better with women than the NDP are.
Yeah. No, there's no, I mean, but so raises the question. I mean, the government, and I asked this, I'm not pronouncing on this, but the government, like if you look at Minister Freeland's announcements, almost all of them have the word feminist in them. This is feminist economic policy. This is feminist social policy. This is feminist this. Do women want to hear that particularly? Because they don't seem to be responding to it. And I presume it's alienating to men that the policy, that where's the male economic policy? There's only a feminist economic policy.
Well, there's a male one if you're gay, because there's an LGBTQ one. Right. But this is my earlier point, and I'm kind of, kind of agreeing with Scott in terms of how I think a lot of people respond to this identity politics lens to look at the world through. I think women are responding to Poilievre talking about the things that are keeping them up at night, which is not worried about, being worried about whether, Donald Trump's going to race across the border and ban abortions here. They're worried about paying their mortgage and cost of living issues and the other stuff that's driving the rest of the electorate. And so, you know how you do better with women? Talk about the issues that are keeping them up at night and that are the greatest concern to them. And it's not this sort of gender identity view of the world. Like it is, like it's such a university talk shop sort of way of approaching politics that I've just never seen actually work from a campaign perspective. Talk about the big issues, focus on those. You'll do better with both genders.
You left crime off your list, by the way, and to me, that's one of the issues that progressive voters misunderstand the most. They think that the people that are worried about crime are old bitchy men who want to have guns and stuff like that. It's old people and women that are concerned about crime.
Who's not riding the TTC at night, David, in Toronto because they're worried about crime?
Yeah.
Well, the answer is both men and women, but more women than men.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, as I predicted, we're not going to get to immigration today. We've used up our time, so I'm going to have to call upon Mr. Pinsent to ring in the Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first.
All right, Jordan.
Go for it.
Fire it up.
Okay.
I don't want to go first.
You don't want to go first.
I don't want to go first. I'm afraid of embarrassing myself.
So my Hey You is going out to Pierre Poilievre and his team. Just some free advice that I'm sure they're going to love. But I watched a tape of Poilievre last week speaking at the IBEW at the Union Convention in Newfoundland last week, and it was really interesting. So he was there, and he was delivering kind of his usual stump speech. And the room was pretty cold, I think, and that kind of led him to go down a litany of I think what has obviously become core to his stump. Some of these like half-baked claims. The Liberals and the NDP are going to take away your trucks and they're going to take away your guns. And in this list of things, I was curious to note that he is still including the promise not to send any future cabinet ministers to the World Economic Forum. And this shit is weird, guys. This is weird. It's weird. It's a conspiracy theory. It's something that, we've talked about this in the past. And I think, we had some discussions about why he might have trotted this out ahead of where he needed to beat Bernier, but that time is long past. And yet here it is, still making an appearance in his stump speech. And so my Hey You is out to probably not so much Poilievre, because it's evident that he clearly finds some value in this, or he would not be including it in his stump. But to the people around him, this shit is bad. It's corrosive. It keeps company with some very unsavory corners of the internet. And you should really just stop it, not only for your own electoral prospects, but because that stuff really has no place here. And that's my Hey You this week.
All right. Very good. Kory.
Well, I wanted to just take note of the passing of Chuck Strahl and throw a kind word out to all of his family and his many friends out there in the world of politics from, I think, every party. Chuck Strahl is one of the classiest and nicest people that I encountered in politics over my time, especially thinking of the Reform Party days, and but also his time as a minister in the Harper government, etc. Just a great person. Saw a lot of nice stories on social media and other places of people remembering interactions that they'd had with him over the years. So anyway, to all the many friends and family of Chuck Strahl, thinking about you. And Chuck was a great guy, and he's going to be missed.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to work with him much, Kory?
Yeah, probably the most closely in the earlier reform period. That's when I would have spent the most time with him. But certainly, while he was a minister, I had many interactions. But I think the thing about him is, it's one of those kinds of people who I don't think ever really had a bad word to say about anybody, or very few, or if they were, they're probably in a quiet place somewhere. Like, he was just a very positive person and somebody who would bring a smile across your face when you encounter him.
Yeah, certainly that kind of acclaim came from all over the place across the spectrum for him. Good life. Scott.
Yeah, I'll just add my voice. I didn't know Chuck Strahl well, but I interacted with him on occasion all these years in Ottawa, and he was there at the same time. And he was, I always really enjoyed him. Very friendly, very affable, decent, just overwhelmingly decent person is the impression you got of the guy. Straightforward, decent guy. My Hey You is to PMO, Freeland, that world. I have a worry. And hopefully this is a rootless worry. But I'm going to flag it now. I watched Kamala Harris's speech last week as she shifted into an economic focus moving into this week's DNC. And it's a prophylactic appeal. Please, Liberals, don't suddenly pop up talking about the economy of opportunity, the opportunity economy. The economy is opportunity. Canada's opportunity economic offering. Just don't borrow it. Okay. I know the impulse will be there. I know there's people sitting around going, Jesus Christ, man, the programs and the approach she's offering and that people are applauding in the United States and the media are greeting as well-founded and thoughtful and broadly appealing. That's our agenda. That's the agenda we've been peddling. That's our thing, man. So maybe we need to start calling it. Don't call it that. Okay? Don't. That's it.
Don't. Just don't. All right. My Hey You goes out to the other side of the Liberal Party caucus, members and supporters across the country, and I guess these days even senators. So, but I'll just say, the latest Abacus poll is just another poll that shows the Liberal number at 23. And let me be the voice of institutional memory here. 23, for those of you who came recently, it's not a fucking acceptable number for the Liberal Party. It is not an historically normal number for the Liberal Party. It is only a normal number if you were around in 2011 and through that period of time. Historically, this is a shockingly low number for the Liberal Party. It is almost unheard of for the Liberal Party to drop below 30 points in this country, whether they're running against Brian Mulroney in 1984 or anybody else. This is not something that the Liberal Party's been in and come back from before, other than after 2011. So I'm just telling you, we are now in virtually as bad a shape as we were in 2011, 2012. And it is historically bad. 23 and the Liberal Party there is no fucking 23 in the Liberal Party. That's not done. So fucking get your heads around it. Jesus
I mean,
Christ.
personally, I'll take the rerun at those numbers. But
Well, I feel I must put my normal asterisks on this, that when you break out the Ontario numbers, Bonnie Crombie is doing 3 points worse than Trudeau in Ontario.
Well, probably because of him, though. Scott?
always be closing, Kory.
Yeah.
Doing worse.
Well, just again, to add one little matchstick to your fire there, David. In 1984, John Turner got 28% of the vote. So 5 points. And that was the most devastating, hair-raising, and therefore soul-searching loss in the party's history to that point. And he was running 5 points ahead of where the party is right now. This is a crisis.
Unbelievable. All right. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our great sponsor, CN Rail, and everybody who watched or listened. And, of course, these three people for sitting around and quarreling with me today about politics. We're all in a shitty mood. I could tell that. We'll be better next week. See you then.
But I'm not here. I should improve everyone's mood.